Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Jank Tank, episode number 21. My name is Timothy Zaccanino. I'm going to be hosting for everybody today. I'm here with both of the boys. We've got Christopher Sofsky and Teld on the line. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Pretty good. Been playing Monster Hunter. It was part of the Humble Bundle sale, and I've dabbled in it a couple of times, but I've been kind of sinking my teeth into it. It's been really fun.
Yeah, Monster Hunter had a little bit of a phenomenon around it.
It started on the PlayStation 2. No, it started on PlayStation 2. It was like 2000 something.
Oh, I meant the most recent one, the one that people Monster Hunter World or something like that.
Yeah, that's part of that. That was the one that was part of the bundle sale that they had. So yeah, that's the one that's like the best selling game in Capcom history or something.
Huh. The only thing I know about Monster Hunter is there's a game called Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker that was like ported over, and there was a Monster Hunter crossover in that game where you could like go fight dinosaur dragons or something. It was really weird playing a Solid Snake like fighting dinosaur dragons, but that's just the type of stuff they do in those games anyway.
It kind of had vibes of like if you took like Dark Souls, Devil May Cry 3, and like a survival game and just jam them all into one, you would kind of get some sort of weird amalgamation that approximates this game.
That's a weird amalgamation. Chris, Monster Hunter fan?
When it came out, I was like looking at it and I was interested in it, but I think I was playing something else and didn't want to spend the money and thought I would come back to it later, which has not happened. But it appealed to me based on what I saw. It just looked like a Souls-like with a very different.
Yeah, the combat is
concept.
Substantially different, but it does have some of those elements of Dark Souls. You know, fighting a big dumb thing and like having to learn the move patterns and the attack patterns and like know where your openings are and all that sort of stuff. So.
Yeah, you can stay tuned for our Capcom podcast after this, but today we are going to make like a bad Tinder date and leave you on red. I was playing that one all night, so
that's always so painful.
If I had known what the episode was in advance, I would have started Red Dead Redemption 2. That's in my backlog. I should have known about that because.
Well, the only reason I pitched this episode is because I had the good title for it. Like I'm not going to let this title go to waste, you know. You click the link, listener. You already know what it's titled. But yeah. Anyway, we're talking about Red. Very similar to how we did Blue in one of our first episodes. At the time,
that has not aged well.
No, it has not. And we're going to talk about all the reasons why that is. But this is twofold. First off, we want to talk about some fundamental things going on in R-Cube. And I think Red is one of those instances where this is a Magic as a whole thing, not just R-Cube. But also, we want to extend our influence to the FBI agent because every time we talk about something being weak in the cube, just magically the next set has what we need to fix it. So hopefully we can talk some sense into whoever's over there designing red cards at WotC. But
I'm just imagining like somebody over there listening to the podcast and like the set has like already been sent to the printer and they just like pick up the phone like, get me the president. Like we need to pull all the cards and print some different ones.
Write that down!
I don't care that we're going to lose $20 million.
There's been a sudden recall on Bloomborough booster packs, and for no apparent reason.
The whole set is just red cards. It's just like 200-something red cards.
Yeah, and then it's just a Lightning Strike reprint.
Give it to me, baby.
Can you imagine, what's the removal in Bloomborough going to look like? It can't be like lightning strikes and murders, right? Like,
I don't know. I think it's a perfectly fine time for a Searing Spear reprint. You know, cute little squirrel throwing a flaming javelin.
Stomp, like you put.
Oh, we're gonna get murder, and there's gonna be like a sinister looking like ferret or something in the art. You know what's happening.
Oh, yeah, we're gonna get a card related to static, and the flavor is gonna be like an animal rubbing its fur together.
Oh my god. Ralzeric, the electric otter. Okay, Red. Yeah. Red. We'll talk about what's going on with Red in our cube, but I think we've pinpointed that Red is our weakest color. I'm of the opinion that there doesn't always have to be a weakest color and strongest color. That's just how people talk. But when it is an identifiable issue, it means you got to take steps to try and fix that. And we'll see if there's things we can do to actually fix Red. It might be a systemic problem, but we'll get into that. Before we do, make sure that you are, I was going to say subscribe to our Discord. That's not really a thing, but make sure you're a part of our Discord. You can find a link to our Discord wherever you're listening to this, and it is just an awesome place to come hang out with people. Come play some Magic, come play some Cube, come play some Brawl Barians, our stipulation-based Brawl League, which is going into League number 6 now. Actually, we don't know what the stipulations are, but we just had a winner declared for League number 5, so we'll get a new set of stipulations for League number 6. And if you are into deck building and you like the Brawl format, you can come join our Discord and get in on that before we start up. I think I'll have this episode up before the next league starts, but join the Discord. That's what I'm trying to say. Come hang out with the coolest people on the internet. And if you don't, that's on you. So quick shout out to Discord member Roha, who had the suggestion that our single card discussions we started in the last episode should probably try to be on theme with the episode we're talking about. That's not always going to be the case. Sometimes there's a card that we just really want to talk about, but we're talking about red today, so we wanted to pick out a red card to talk about. And the one we went with here is Slick Shot Show Off, the newcomer from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. This is the 1 in a red 1/2 bird wizard with flying and haste. It gets +2/+0 when you cast a non-creature spell, and it has plot for 1 in a red. And I want this to kind of be like a little bit of a two-part discussion where, first off, let's talk about plot and just how that's played out, and then let's talk about the actual card. Because one of the big question marks when we talked about this card for the Thunder Junction review was, how is plot actually going to play out? When are you going to plot? And having played the set pretty extensively now and a couple plot cards in our cubes, I think it's fair to say plot is just a blanket good mechanic if it's on good card. Like, plot's one of those like cycling kicker type mechanics where it's like the mechanic is just good.
Yeah,
it's a clean, nice mechanic. It gives you some decision making to do, but in the case of like Slick Shot Show Off, like, it's kind of hard to go wrong. Like, it's hard to make a wrong decision with the card. But talk to me about plot. Have you guys been seeing this card plotted more often than cast, or vice versa?
Almost always.
Yeah, you see it plotted like every time, right?
Plot every time. And here's the thing, is you kind of think of this card as like, okay, you've got to play it the turn after so you can start casting your spells and like getting damage in, right? But the way this card actually plays is you plot it on 2, and then you play the game. And eventually, your opponent has to tap out. And then you have a bunch of mana, and you've been sandbagging some burn spells. And you go, okay, cast my show off. I'm going to like cast 2 burn spells, and attack you for 5. And suddenly your opponent just got like absolutely chonked. Very, very common line in this card. I mean, sometimes you just jam it and you start attacking. But if you know your opponent's like representing removal, it's very frequent that this card just ends up being like, I'm going to go down a card for a couple of turns, and eventually you're going to have to tap out, and then I'm going to kill what you played and like attack you for a ton of damage.
So your opponent plots this against you on turn 2. What do you do to anticipate the turn that it's coming down? Because that's the problem, is like with plot and Dust Animus is another one that falls into this line where like the fact that you get all of your mana open the turn you take it off of plot is huge, because that just lets you keep up the protection spell or the counter spell or whatever you're doing depending on your colors. And God forbid, like, you resolve your Slick Shot Show Off and you get to counter something and get +2/+0 off your counter spell or whatever in Is It decks. Is it like the home for this, or are you guys seeing it show up in non-Is It red decks?
Oh no, this is a secret Is It gold card.
Well, it kind of is, but I will say that at least in our cube, the decks where I've seen it like really, really, really be scary are nominally Is It decks that are like 80% red cards. Because what you really like, cantrips with this are good, but I mean, the cantrips with cards like this are always good. But I think its real purpose is to like make all of your burn cards like +2 damage to face. Like at least that's how it's gotten me dead. Is like the cards it combines with that really make it a murderer are burn cards.
It's like having a Torbrand in play.
Kind of, yeah.
Like, that's what the card feels like. It's a Torbrand that, like, you get to just invest 2 mana on, and you can, like, play around removal very easily with it. It's kind of crazy.
It's also a big game that it's non-creature and not instant or sorcery. It, like, they've really started to move away from, like, instant or sorcery, and I think that that's a good move, personally.
Yeah, I think having it be instant or sorcery is a good gate mechanic when they're talking about like cost reduction type things. I think that's usually a pretty good idea.
Totally.
But for effects like this prowess sort of thing, I like the non-creature. I do firmly stand by the fact that I think this is an Is It gold card, though. I think you want to be playing blue-red. It does the best in blue-red. I think it is partly, along with the addition of Sprite Dragon, carrying that archetype on its back. But I think the problem is I think one of the things I'm seeing is this card I don't think goes in every red deck. And I think you have to draft it as if it does, because people are really high on it and they understand its power. And so people will speculate on it and try to get into the deck off of this card. So it creates a bit of a draft conundrum, I think. But that's not like the fault of the card. The card's great, and that's why it's doing that. I just think that if you end up playing this card and like you're not either a spells heavy mono red deck or like Izzet, which are kind of functionally the same decks at this point, we've moved our Izzet deck in a direction of being this like spells aggro deck, and that is the direction we're trying to push the deck. And so, like, I think if you don't end up in that sort of shell, I think this card is much worse. Like, you wouldn't want this in Boros for the most part, I don't think. I mean, like, you might play it, it would probably be okay. But I think you're much less excited to play this in Boros, and Gruul and Rakdos, I think you're probably just not playing it.
Gruul, I don't think is a good home for it. I think Rakdos can be, like, if you're not doing, like, the red-black stack thing, if you're playing, like, an aggressive deck that's, like, largely red, but features like a couple good black creatures and then like Doomblades. I mean, I think it's good with Doomblades, obviously.
Have we seen anyone pull this off of Plot and Ember Cleave it in the same turn yet? Because what is that, like 50 damage or something?
Yeah, I don't know. What I have seen is Plot on 2. I was playing a green deck, so I was like, well, I'm tapping out. Like if I'm not tapping out, I'm just gonna die to that thing, right? So, like, turn 2 Plot, I tapped out, and then my opponent just went, like, this Sprite Dragon bolt to face, or, like, bolt my bird, it was bolt my bird, and it was just like...
You're at 10, and you lost your creature, yeah.
And your
opponent has 2 must answer threats in play, like...
yeah.
I mean, my big Lumen question when we saw the card was, like, are you giving up a lot by just not getting in that 1 point of damage, like, over a course of a couple turns by not plotting it? And it turns out, like, even if you wait 4 turns to take this thing off of suspend, so to speak, the turn that you take it off, you usually make up for all that damage and then some, and you, like, guarantee that big turn where this gets to just unload. Like, you usually have 1 turn, right? You have 1 turn where you unload a ton of damage, and then maybe this attacks as, like, a 3-2 later on, or always threatens to attack as a 3-2, but you do get that 1 turn where you just get, like, 4 to 6 extra points of damage off of the spells that you're casting that turn, and that's worth giving up the chip damage, so to speak, from the previous turns. Also a wizard.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure this card is the tipping point for Flame of Anor.
Flame of Anor has just gotten out of hand, where it turns out there's so many wizards now. When Flame of Anor is doing 2 modes and also pumping your creatures, it's just like, all right, I guess I'll just lose. Like, that's fun.
You curve into Flame of Anor with this too. Like, you just get destroyed. You just like, you plot it and then you cast it, and because of the way Flame of Anor works, they can't even Doomblade it in response. I mean, they can to kill your creature, but you still like are 3 for 1-ing them.
Do you guys think, just to wrap up the discussion, do you think this is a forever card?
How I'm thinking about, like, okay, so it's funny, right? Like, we stopped calling the unrestricted cube because it's actually heavily restricted now. I can't imagine that I would want to push the cube eventually into, like, a power level where this is, like, not good enough anymore.
Yeah, the only way I see this card not being kind of a forever card is, like, we get a density of cards that are of similar power level but more flexible, right? They go into more decks for some reason. Or we some reason decide to back off of this Izzet as an aggro deck and decide to just every blue shell as a control shell, which I don't think we're doing. I think we've decided pretty firmly we like having blue decks that aren't explicitly control decks, so that it divvies up the card pool a little bit.
I can imagine people cool on this one a little bit over time, but I think we've got a potential forever card here.
Yeah, it's real good, and I just want to note before we get into the episode, it's also really notable, and I think that this is, like, easily the most important part of the card, is that one thing we've observed recently is that, like, as creatures get bigger, like, red creatures' lack of evasion, like, where white has, like, a good number of flyers that can kind of, like, race big ground creatures or whatever, continue to push damage. The fact that this has evasion is, like, the whole fucking card. So hopefully we see some more red flyers.
Yeah, or I'd like to see them use more of Menace. Like, Menace is a tertiary or secondary red mechanic, and I don't feel like we see enough of that on constructed playable cards. Or, like, cubable cards, rather.
Agreed. Yeah, I want more keywords on my red creatures that aren't prowess.
And, like, First Strike is good, but we see with Breaches that very frequently, like, that 4th point of toughness means that it does not matter that Breaches has First Strike. You just, like, you still gotta combine it with the burn spell or use the Falter effect.
It's time to give red lifelink. I think we're at that point.
Hell yeah, baby.
Red. So, what is red's position in present-day Magic? And like I said, I think a lot of the issues that we see in our cube with red are systemic as a whole issues that you see in things like Vintage Cube and you see in things like maybe even Commander. So I think Red's position in Magic is reflected in our cube, not necessarily that our cube is doing something different. And then I want to talk a little bit about like steps Red needs to take in the future to kind of fix where it's at right now. And, you know, maybe we'll wrap up by talking about some Red cards that we personally would like.
Yeah, can I take just a second? When we say weakest color, I think sometimes people may get the wrong impression, because Red actually does show up in a number of our 3.0 lists. But when we say Red is our weakest color, I think what we're getting at is Red as a base color. So like what Red does when it is the primary focus of your deck is weak. Not Red it's kind of like when we said blue was the worst color, we were referring mostly to like base blue control oriented decks. And so with the Red decks, Red's kind of native thing is being aggressive and getting your opponent dead, and not being like splashing for, you know, a very powerful threat or splashing for some removal spells, which is what we're seeing Red in the current iteration of the cube.
Yeah, we did have fundamentally a Red aggressive deck 3.0 about a month ago, but it was supplemented with very powerful Izzet cards. And then before that, our last, like, very much a base Red hyper-aggressive deck was at the end of March. So it hasn't been, like, unheard of recently, but there's definitely a perception that it's not particularly good. I still think it's 3.0 capable, but I do think, not only in, like, the way cards have been designed in the last handful of years, which we'll get into, but also some systemic choices that are kind of, like, vestigial organs of Red aggro was once like an absolute bloodthirsty tyrant in our cube that we've just been very slow to address are also problems. But we'll get into that in more detail.
Now it's more like a tenacious underdog.
Get out of here.
Okay. Well, you're done, Teld. I'm putting you on mute for the rest of the episode.
Yeah.
By weakest color, I don't necessarily mean by like win percentage, even though Red has not had a particularly good win percentage. I think it's more that if you go through color by color and you say, what are the weaknesses of these colors, you can point out a lot more things about Red than you can about the other colors right now. Some of these have been long-term things. Some of them are things that are popping up due to card design now. But we all know Red has temporary card draw and every other color has permanent card draw now. Like, I think white even can just draw a ton of cards now given certain setups. I think one of the biggest things here, and this is kind of encompassing a lot of different points, is Red's removal is and always has been damage based, and we are in like a stats renaissance where the stats on creatures are way higher than they used to be at every given point on the curve, which means Red removal is having a harder time killing creatures, which really sucks for Red because removal is like a core identity of Red, right? Also, you know, indestructible, lifelink, these are just keywords that you can throw on creatures as a bonus, and they affect Red more disproportionately than other colors. And we've seen a lot more liberal use of keywords these days. I guess Vigilance too. I didn't really think about Vigilance, but Vigilance affects Red when they just slap it on big creatures because your opponent gets to pressure you, but also stonewall your creatures. There's a lot of things working against Red, but I think one of the biggest things that has kind of shifted Red's role in modern Magic, not just our cube, is the stats on creatures. Like, there's a lot more 2/4s for 3. In fact, we went through and we axed a number of 2/4s for 3, but that's just a stat line they use on everything, it seems, these days. 2/4 for 3, or sometimes even bigger. You get cards like Bloated Contaminator or Sentinel. Sentinel of the Lost City? That's like a 3/4 for 3.
Yeah, it's a 3/4 Vig for 3, which is just an egregious stat line.
In addition, they I was saying that they throw +1 counters and like stat buffs on more creatures, and like a Doomblade doesn't care if your creature has 2 +1/+1 counters on it, but that Lightning Strike no longer kills that 2/2 if you put 2 +1 counters on it.
Right.
For sure. And then you get, you know, the farther up the curve they go, the bigger these creatures are starting to get to, with your like Bristlebud Farmer on 4 and your Colossal Rattleworm, which is not a card we even play in Cube or would consider in Cube. But
can I interest you in a 4-mana 6/5 Trample as a base that also randomly has Flash and Recursion with certain land types? Yeah.
Their willingness these days to just like create a card that would have been cool in like 2015 and just add like +2/+2 to it or something for like no additional mana is just crazy. And it affects Red like the most. It does affect other aggressive colors, obviously, but white and black do have clean, like, get a thing out of the way removal, whereas Red has to get over a certain toughness threshold. And as I've noted here, like every point of toughness is progressively harder for a red deck to deal with. So like the difference between 3 and 4 toughness is actually quite a bit, because that's a drop off between the number of removal spells that can actually deal with a creature. And when you're going lower down the curve but going higher up on the toughness, we've seen that the red removal doesn't necessarily match up against the creatures particularly well these days.
Though we have seen a few, I guess, acknowledgments of this. We've gotten recently Witchstalker Frenzy, Torch the Witness, and Scorching Shot, all of which are able to, some in different levels of efficiency, deal with bigger creatures.
Yeah, I think a lot of that was response to Shieldred the Apocalypse. Like, they knew 4/5 for 4 was going to be a brick wall for red, and they seeded a lot of ways to, like, kill a Shieldred the Apocalypse. So that's one thing I'm going to talk about later as far as, like, where does red go from here, is you can't make a 2-mana spell that deals 5 to your opponent, but you can make a 2-mana removal spell that deals 5 to a creature. So we really need to ratchet up, like, creature removal for red.
It's funny that you should mention that, because, like, once upon a time, I think that, you know, burn didn't do, like, a ton of damage, you know, vis-a-vis taking out creatures, because the trade-off is that you can just, like, trade it for damage, right? It does double duty. Red burn has not gotten better since the days of yore. It's actually gotten worse. The burn that they print in Modern Magic is not as powerful as old burn is. Like, it's not even particularly close. You know, they're like, old burn spells could either be like flashbacked, even though like their rate wasn't particularly good, so you could get multiple prowess triggers out of it. You know, multiple, like, you could use it to kill like a cheap creature early and then use it to get over the finish line later. Or it was just better on rate, or, you know, whatever. If you look at a lot of cube lists, the best burn in those cube lists is stuff that was printed like a million years ago.
Yeah, they don't give us any more Fire Blasts or Price of Progresses or really even like Flame Rift type cards.
Right, exactly. So that would be fine if creatures weren't getting larger, but when creatures get larger in this environment, like burn being like bad removal that also is face reach, when it becomes, the burn is like terrible removal that also has face reach, then it reduces like the cross functionality of the card, which just makes it worse, obviously. So that's problematic. And another thing I was going to just touch on briefly, because you brought up Scorching Shot, etc., is I think, at least in the current positioning of our cube, I actually have gotten to the point where I value the stuff that does a lot of efficient damage to creatures higher than Face Burn that's not Lightning Bolt. Like, if I see a pack that has Lightning Strike in it and, like, Obliterating Bolt, which is a 2-mana deal 4 that exiles whatever it kills, like, I want that more than the strike. You know, with a lot of your best creatures being creatures that increase in value off of prowess triggers, and in fact, in the case of like a lot of the smaller ones, are just straight up bad creatures unless you're triggering them, the ability to cast one of those spells and remove, as we've discussed at this point ad nauseum, like increasingly larger blockers in Modern Magic, get my prowess triggers and turn my Obliterating Bolt into face damage by actually clearing the way for my prowess creatures to get face. Those effects have gone increasingly up in my pick order off of like raw Face Burn.
Yeah, Obliterating Bolt specifically has some also relevant utility against some very powerful cards like Aclazotz and Rekindling Phoenix and things like that are normally gigantic pains for your red deck to get past.
Yeah, Strangle, another example. Like, I'll take Strangle over Lightning Strike pretty much all day at this point.
Well, it's worth noting, too, that, like, not just the stat lines, but, like, the threats that are going to kill you are no longer 6-mana creatures, they're 3-mana creatures. So a lot of times when you have a Lightning Strike in hand, you don't have the luxury of holding it until you can, like, burn your opponent out for 3. You have to remove, like, all of these threats your opponents play, which means your burn is going at those creatures anyway, like, more often than it's going at your opponent's face. It's nice to have the option to send a Lightning Strike at your opponent's face, but if your opponent has a Preacher of the Schism on the board, you have to get rid of it, or else your red deck's not attacking, and you're not going to get them to the point where you can strike their face. So prioritize in a way to kill an X4 on 3 so that you can jam with your 1 and 2 drop. You're going to get that damage in that you wouldn't have otherwise, which is what you wanted to do with your Lightning Strike, but you also kill a must-kill threat like a Chrome Host Seed Shark or something lands on the table. You don't have the luxury of just saying, like, okay, I'm going to hold off and burn you out on turn 7 or something. You're just going to die to a Seed Shark, so you got to kill that.
Well, and it's funny that you should mention this card specifically, because I was thinking too, like, once upon a time, 4 toughness on a 3-mana creature was like a green thing, and now it's like an every single color thing.
Every color but red.
Right. It was like specifically like green is a bad matchup for red in our design, and I think a lot of designs, because it just like goes over the top of you, and then there's not really a whole lot you can do about that. And there's also a lot of green cards that kind of incidentally gain life, which puts them out of burn reach. So like your creatures aren't going to get there, and you're not going to get over the finish line by like top decking Lightning Bolt anymore either. But now it's in black, it's in blue, it's in white, it's everywhere. So like that problem extends into all of your matchups. And then if you think about a card like Lightning Strike, when so many 3-cost creatures across colors have 4 toughness, not only can Lightning Strike like not remove those creatures, but it becomes very difficult in this overstated era that we're in for like Lightning Strike to ever trade up for more than like 1 mana. We're beating a dead horse a little bit, but like Red Burn has not scaled to the new realities of creature size in Magic.
We're beating a red horse.
Oh, God. All right, you're both disqualified. This is my podcast.
You just
now.
Talking to yourself for the next hour.
This podcast is going to be a real calamity.
No,
So, you had a comment about the table flipping nature of red, or lack thereof.
So yeah, I sort of feel like red cards, if you look at our list, just there's so many fewer cards that completely warp the game around them. This is where red trades on like efficiency, right? Is that red cards tend to be all do the same thing, and they tend to be relatively efficient and good, but they don't have the same impact as like an Aclazotz or a Vorinclex or like a Bristlebud Farmer, where like the game suddenly becomes about getting this card off the table. You know, Inti's really good, but you still have to be able to attack. So like if you can't attack, a lot of times, you know, your opponent plays a 5/5, right? You can attack with your 3/3, but like a lot of times unless you can combine it with burn to get rid of it, you know, Inti isn't necessarily taking over the game in that way. You know, and Breach is as good as it is. If you just stick an X4 in front of it, they have to use the falter effect every single time in order to get past that one creature. They don't get to use it to generate card advantage in the way that like a Preacher in the Schism would still generate card advantage. And when you move up the curve, Inferno Titan will win a lot of games, but it doesn't deal with a big creature. Just resolve a Grave Titan and resolve an Inferno Titan. They're both really good, but Grave Titan more often than not just says, okay, game's over.
Yeah, I mean, I think like this is kind of highlighting though, like talking about Inferno Titan, because Inferno Titan is like pretty much like a slam. I think what we're talking about where red is feeling like it's not keeping up these days, we're mostly talking about like the aggressive end of red, you know, because like there's still plenty of great red cards. Like for example, like we could say that they haven't printed great red cards in a while. I don't want to include like Ragavan in this discussion at all, because that's just like completely broken in half and just a stupid card that I don't think people should play, because it's just a turn 0 scoop in so many situations. You know, there's cards like Fable of the Mirror Breaker, which is an insane mid-range card, but like part of the problem for like red in cube, especially if your fixing is good, is like the red aggressive player's not getting Fable. Like someone's first or second picking Fable, and then if they're not in red, they'll like bend their mana to still play it, you know? So, like, your red aggro player is not ending up with that card very often.
Also, like, if your goal is to get your opponent dead, Fable, I mean, it is a good value card, but Fable's not particularly good at just getting your opponent's life total to 0.
Right. Well, yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying, is, like, when I think about, like, recent red prints not, like, keeping up with other colors, I'm mostly thinking about the aggressive-oriented stuff.
Yeah.
For sure. I wanted to make a point real quick about the vintage cube that I think we see reflected in our cube a little bit. And a lot of times we don't talk about the vintage cube here because it's operating on like a different set of parameters and different archetypes and all sorts of different things that don't really work in the arena card pool that we work with. We've seen the vintage cube kind of axe red aggro as an intended archetype, and a traditional intended archetype, right? Something that's been around forever, to the point where like red aggro was considered the fun police. Like, people would talk about red aggro as if it were the fun police. Like, no matter what you were doing in Vintage Cube, if you were going there to have a good time, you always had to be on the lookout for red aggro. And now in 2024, we're at the point where they don't even explicitly support it anymore. They cut cards like Sulfuric Vortex, a lot of the traditional aggressive one-drops like Goblin Guide and stuff like that. I've heard a lot of talk that cards like Monastery Swift Spear are probably on the chopping block too. Like, there's Ragavan, but Ragavan, like you said, is secretly less of a red aggro card and more of a like cross your fingers and hope your opponent dies on turn 1 card. So it like kind of cheats at the red aggro thing. But I think all of the weaknesses that we talked about reflect in Magic as a whole. And if the vintage cube is no longer supporting red aggro, like we have to ask ourselves, what is the position of red aggro in Magic, you know?
Well, I do want to make one aside here about red aggro and vintage cube, because people were sounding the alarm bells for years before any of this happened that red was overrated as a general rule in extremely high power, fast mana environments. Because if you're trying to kill someone on a specific turn limit, but like say turn 4, turn 5, but your opponent has combos that go off as early as turn 3, you are in for a bad time. Mono white for a long time has been considered a better aggro deck, even like before they were no longer explicitly supporting red as an aggressive deck, just because the disruptive elements that white gives become so much more powerful in these super fast environments. Thalia is like a first pickable. Let me preface: I haven't played Vintage Cube in over a year personally. I've played like, you know, shotgun with people and stuff. But last time I was checking the way people were drafting it, Thalia is like a first pickable / like you see Thalia, you can pivot into mono white and play like a good mono white deck. Because that 1 mana disruption is so powerful in a super fast environment. Whereas red doesn't have the speed, like red doesn't get that much faster in Vintage Cube relative to say like Legacy Cube, but the speed at which your opponents are doing their thing does get much faster.
Mm-hmm. Red was the reverse of that, though, is that red gave those combo decks less time to find their combos. White aggro does too, obviously.
Sure.
Aggro in general is a way to combat those, but like they're just like whoever's out there designing Vintage Cube, and a lot of people seem to agree with them. They seem to kind of unanimously agree that like explicit supported red aggro is just not where Magic's at as a whole. You know, we would like for that to be the case in our cube because we like to support the traditional kind of things that people, you know, have grown up with and things like that. But it's also a point that in Vintage Cube, people aren't. I mean, in 2014 or 2015, when I was first playing Vintage Cube, people were trying to resolve Consecrated Sphinx and Frost Giant, and the green decks were trying to resolve things like Acidic Slime and Karn Liberated, and now across the board, decks are trying to resolve super powerful 3-drops. So the red deck is now contending with people doing their late game big plays on turn 2 or 3 instead of turn 5 or 6 or whatever. And I think we see some of that trickle down to our cube, right? Because those stat lines go down the curve, the super powerful cards like Adeline. We've cut a lot of these, right? These 3-drops that we talked about for being polar, for being just game warping cards, the Fabled, the Mirror Breakers, the Adeline, stuff like that. At this point, Siege Shark, you know, Preacher of the Schism. Like we're cutting a lot of these.
We have like a full cycle of broken 3s at this point.
Yeah, it really is. Like, except does red have a broken? Oh, Fable the Mirror Breaker, Lelia. Yeah, red has broken 3s too. But I just wanted to make that point that like red aggro is not just like, oh, our cube, it doesn't stack up well. I think it just doesn't stack up well in Magic.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like I think like you hit on an excellent point there, Tim, which is like, if you accept the continuum of like control, mid-range aggro, you know, this beats this, which obviously is not universally true, boils down to your cube design, yada, yada, yada. But I think broadly throughout constructed history, this sort of like paradigm comes from real lived experience. When the mid-range decks are getting their, like, I'm going to shut you out of the game soon cards on turn 3, that obviously is just going to nerf red aggro in general. White hasn't suffered as much, but part of it is just like the creature quality. If you look at like White's 2-drops from the last like handful of years, you've got cards like Intrepid Adversary, Luminarch Aspirant, Dust Animus, Regal Bunnycorn, which, you know, is a very simple design, but it turns out like a 2-mana 5/5 is pretty good. Selfless Spirit, which protects you from getting your board completely picked apart. These are just high quality creatures on their own. And then if you look at our 2-drops, like several of our 2-drops are really old cards at this point, like Karizev and Earthshaker Kenra, obviously with Karizev being a significantly stronger card. Like there was a period, and this affected, you know, red being so dominant in our cube for a while. You know how in Magic Design it kind of seems like they go through cycles of like pushing specific colors. Like all of a sudden a specific color for like 3 or 4 sets will just get like a bunch of great prints. This feels like they're maybe starting to do this with red again. Maybe they've started to recognize they have a little bit of a problem. But Karizev is from like the last era where I really remember them like hardcore pushing a ton of good red cards, and red being a dominant color in standard.
Yeah, Hazoret came from that same era.
Hazoret, Glorybringer, Chandra Torch of Defiance, these are still like among the most powerful red cards in our entire cube, and they're almost a decade old at this point.
It wasn't until this year that with or I guess maybe it would have been into last year. I can't remember when LCI. I guess last year was LCI. But it wasn't until very recently with LCI that we actually got a 2-drop that I would say is like, you can solidly say is better than Karizev in Inti. And then now Slickshot is like situationally better than Karizev. But like, this is still like, we're looking at Karizev, which is like you said, it's like what, over 10 years? It's like 10 years old at this point, right? Or close to
almost,
it?
Yeah,
just
close
about.
to it.
And like, that is still one of the best red 2-drops we have access to. It's just that is like kind of what we're looking where. Meanwhile, like you said, White has just gotten print after print after print after print of premium cards in that lower mana section of the curve. And when you look at the 1-drops, it's a similar deal. Like, I know we kind of meme about it, but like, red just doesn't get good 1-drops like Thraben Inspector, right? You just like, we have Darcy, which was what, Modern Horizons 1 or 2?
Yeah, not only is it a Modern Horizons card, but Darcy is not like in every red aggressive deck card.
And then Grim Lavamancer is like not an aggro card explicitly, and it's also 1,000,000 years old.
Speaking of old cards, like even if you look at like high power cubes that are still supporting red aggro and are playing like a lot of 1-drops, like most of the red 1-drops that you see in even higher power cubes are all really old. Like Soulscar Mage, Monastery Swiftspear is fucking ancient at this point. As you mentioned, Lavamancer. There are people, and like actually, we've had a discussion about whether or not Goblin Guide would be like particularly good in Modern Magic, like drawing your opponent like half a card every turn. Like that's often cited as like one of the best red 1-drops of all time. And we're not even. First of all, it's really old, and second of all, like we're not even convinced that it would be great at this point. Zergo Bellstriker, also very old, and then there's Ragavan, which is like not really part of the conversation.
Yeah, different class altogether.
Yeah, and like it's just interesting that like a lot of the, even in classically powerful cubes, the red 1-drops, they're all really old cards, which is like a testament to the fact that like they can't seem to get it right. You know, it's like the red 1-drops either just can't be particularly powerful in contemporary prints, or they're just completely fucking absurd. And this is kind of a commentary on like red creatures in general too. Like if you look at a lot of higher powered cube lists, the most broken red creatures are all from like commander set nonsense, what like Lelia that wasn't intended for heads up play, or it's Goblin Rabble Master, which again is really, really old.
M15, baby.
Yeah.
I mean, I got excited when we saw Embereth Veteran in Wilds of Eldraine, because it was like, oh, we've got Savannah Lions in red with upside, that's in air quotes, and no drawback. What I don't want to do, I do not want to get into the like Savannah Lions discussion here right now, but
yeah,
like
that.
I also hoped it was a signal that red 1-drops were going to get better.
Yeah, we wanted to see, but then like next set we saw, I mean, if you listen to our episodes, and why aren't you listening to our episodes, but in our reviews, we're talking about cards like Reckless Lackey and the Scapegoat in our reviews, because we're like, oh, is this finally a red 1-drop that's going to replace, I don't know, Embereth Veteran or Falcon Wrath Pit Vampire? Like, yeah, like, and it turns out every single time it's like, you know, whatever, not really. Chris came to us, I think it was last month sometime, and he's like, you know what, guys, like quiet voice, like Chris voice, I think Phoenix Chick is better than Reckless Lackey, and me and Teld are both like, we don't give a shit. Like, we have 8 1-drops, I think, in the red section, if you include Kamano Faces Kakazan, which is actually quite good.
7,
the best of them by a lot.
Yeah, it's our best. It's our best 1-drop. But we have like 3 or 4 that I would call good role players. It's Kamano versus Kakazan, and then like the spell slingery ones, and then we have the other 3 to 4 that are just all interchangeable filler cards. And like, yeah, there might be a point difference between Rabbit Battery, Phoenix Chick, Fanatical, Scapegoat, whatever, the Ronin. I know, Chris, you like the Reinforced like the Ronin. But at the end of the day, like, whichever one of those you think is better is still, that entire category is like a tier below like anything that other colors have to do with their 1-drops and stuff like that. It's just red 1-drops are not getting better unless they're called Ragavan. And I don't know that I want to see a world where like every set has a Ragavan level 1 drop. So it's like
no, but they can thread the needle. They're just not trying. And
they can. And but I mean, like Wayward Guide Beast was like their last attempt to give us a 2-power haste creature for one. Like
yeah. I don't know if we plan to, but we've talked a lot about how they're just like printing busted 3-drop after busted 3-drop, which is why like mid-range decks have ruled standard for forever now. And yeah, like we're talking about these 1-drops being really, really old, or like the newer prints just like not pushing the power level. And like, you know, Tim, you hit on this earlier, like when the really, really broken cards start coming out on turn 3, like, and the 1-drops aren't getting any better, they get invalidated faster than they used to.
Kellen, 10th District Detective, Dust Animus. In the last like 4 months or whatever, 5 months, 6 months, we've gotten multiple 2/3s for 2 in white. Like,
yeah,
with upsides,
out there.
with real upsides. And red just gets like, here's another nest robber. Here's a robber of the rich creature, but like it does something to it's. I don't know. Do red 3/1 for 1? Like is that a card?
It's funny, dude. That's exactly what I was just thinking. I was like, are we hurtling towards a universe where like a 1-drop has to have 3 power?
Well, like, if we got Porcelain Legionnaire right now, it would still be like it was jokingly called for a while red's best 2-drop.
Yeah,
and like I think we're still at a point where it would be one of the better red 2-drops if we got it right now. Like, and it's not even a red card.
Yeah. But by the way, did you want to make a case for Kamano Faces Kakazan? Because I think I agree it's the best red 1-drop, and I don't know if the world at large, like, I don't know what the world's opinion about this card is, but I don't see it mentioned very often.
I think its inclusion in Standard is probably raising its profile, and I was actually over on the MTG Cube Talk Discord, kind of talking about red 1-drops when I was like pulling my hair out over how do we like improve red's early game. Okay, so I'm just going to read Kamano Faces Kakazan, and for people who aren't aware of it, it's a saga from Neo for 1 red mana. Chapter 1 is it deals 1 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker they control, which I have seen that ping down planeswalkers occasionally, but it's just like 1 free damage, right? And then Chapter 2, and I think this is where it gets really good, when you cast your next creature spell this turn, that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So if you curve this into like Karizev or something, like that's incredible. And then the last chapter is you get a 2/2 haster that has annoying creatures get exiled text on it that like is occasionally really, really relevant. So your 2/2 haste doesn't come down until later, but the package that you get if you manage to curve a creature into it is 3/3 of stats, and 1 free face damage and 1 free damage to a planeswalker. And the thing about like on turn 3, this 2/2 haster coming down is if you're pushing damage with creatures and burn, the 2/2 actually gets through a lot more often than you would think that it does, because they're either going to like be incentivized to trade for a better creature that you've managed to play on 2, or, you know, this just comes down for free, and then you just get to, well, not for free because you invested 1 mana, but it comes down for 3, and then you get to do something with your 3 mana, like remove their best blocker, or play a hasty 3-drop or something. Oh, yeah, and it also triggers your prowess creatures, which is a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's just great. Just a very, very powerful card. I mean, it's like, in our Neo Cube, it's like one of the cards that you just first pick and you force mono red because it's like it'll win you the game, and it's like it translates pretty well into other environments where I think it's just generally it might be the best red 1-drop ever printed, to be honest. Like Darcy's probably better in the specific shells, and like there's obviously case. Oh, well, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
Ragavan doesn't exist.
I mentally pretend that card doesn't exist.
I know.
Like, but like outside of specific niches with like Darcy and Grim that I think come up, I mean, I think it's just like the most generically good mono red aggro card for a 1-drop that we maybe we'll. I mean, I don't know when we'll get better than like 1 mana for like 3/3 and a ping worth of stats.
It's sure as hell the best one on curve. Like that's not even like a discussion.
Yeah.
And speaking of those prowess creatures too, like we should note that red Spellslinger decks are actually quite good, or quite supported these days. And the best 1-drops that we have access to usually lean into that, like Darcy, and I think Soulscar Mage is decent, like without being that good. Monastery Swift Spear is decent without being that good. But those are like the best of the 1-drops that we have access to. And, you know, we spent the single card discussion talking about a Spellslinger card. The Spellslinger decks do get a lot of support. They actually bolster the burn spells in a way that, like, makes them better than just 1-for-1 removal and stuff like that. So they kind of play into one of Red's biggest strengths, but I did want to mention Spellslinger Red, decent, as opposed to Aggro Red.
It's a little problematic, though, right? Because, like, Soulscar Mage and Monastery Swift Spear, these 1-drops that are, like, traditionally included in cube aggressive decks, they want you to be playing a Pile of Burn because, like, otherwise, if you're not regularly triggering Monastery Swift Spear, it's not good, right? Like, you have to be triggering it. And that actually creates a situation where those cards don't play nearly as well in, like, 2-color aggro decks. Like, these are cards that want to play with other red cards, which makes it harder to shore up your red deck's weaknesses by going into a second color.
Sure. One of the things that we talked about on the last episode was the increasing ease at which you can play, like, 3-color decks in our environment. You can, like, really stretch your mana. And, I mean, Drix went to put us to task on that, and his last deck was playing 4 colors with 2 pips in every color, just absolutely making a mockery of the mana base and just, like, you know, consistently casting Inferno Titan, Aclazotz, double blue spells, and, like, double white spells. But, like, one of the problems that I think green and red are facing is that those are colors in which a lot of our previous design choices were based around having cards that played well with other cards of those colors in a format that is increasingly coming about how far can you stretch your mana and, like, what extra power can you get by doing so. We explicitly said playing monocolored decks in our cube in the last episode is probably a really, really bad idea. And even playing a straight 2-color deck is not a great idea. So it shouldn't be a surprise that the 2 colors that most want to play with other cards of their color are struggling a little bit in the current design era.
Exactly, yeah. And, like, white cards don't really have the same problem. Like, cheap white cards don't really have the same problem that red cards do because the cheap white cards are just good creatures.
Yeah. Oh, I was beaming about you last night, but you were playing Timeless Cube, and, like, it was, like, turn 5, turn 6, and you top deck a Thraben Inspector in one of the games, and it was like, Chris, that feel good, you know? And you're like, yeah. And then the next game you drew Usher, and it was...
He's trying to sneak the Savannah Lions discussion in here. Don't let him, Tim. Restore order.
I assume this was a segue into the last point about the Reds' position in our the arena card pool, but it's been noted that when we play the Timeless Cube, which isn't the most balanced thing in the world, it's not really designed to be the most balanced thing in the world, but I think Teld and I have said a couple times, like, red is not a great color to be in for the Timeless Cube because the transition from our mainline cube to the Timeless Cube doesn't really offer that many upgrades for red from what we're used to playing. Same with blue, like blue has mana drain and stuff now, and blue's just gotten to a better color. But in the Timeless Cube, when you're absolutely power maxing red as much as possible, you do pick up like 4 or 5 cards like Ragavan, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Lelia, and Bonehorde Dracosaur is a card that has a little bit of contention behind whether it's too good for the mainline cube or whatever. Fury is a card that we think we're getting in Modern Horizons 3. I don't know if it's been leaked or not, but my point being, like, power maxed red still is not that impressive when you're power maxing all the other colors too. Like Fable the Mirror Breaker is a very powerful card, Ragavan's a very powerful card, but when all the other colors are picking up like 10 to 15 of the most broken cards that, you know, the arena client has access to, it shows. I have Sneak Attack on this list too, but I don't really think Sneak Attack is like indicative of red or anything like that. So yeah, red needs a boost. Red needs a boost, especially red aggro. Red aggro needs a boost is the point here. I want to make a quick point about Commander, and I'm not sure exactly how I want to phrase this, but I think Commander is actually responsible for, I mean, it's absolutely responsible for red getting the push that it needs, because you can't push red face burn in Constructed. Like there's this limitation that's always on red in Constructed, because you can't just allow red to have cards that deal 6 damage on turn 3 or something like that without like completely warping 20 life formats. But in Commander, when you have to play against 120 total life and kill your opponent, you can push red, and that is where red has gotten the biggest boost, which does trickle down into Cube when you start getting those Commander-specific cards. So if you think about the Vintage Cube busted cards right now, like Gut, True Soul Zealot, Goblin Bombardiers, I don't know if you're aware of that card or not, Chris, but it's like it's a red 3-drop that can deal like 10 damage out of nowhere. Lelia came from Commander. Fiery Confluence, a card that I think would actually be quite good in our card pool, came from Commander, but you can't just print that in Standard because it's 4 mana and deals 6 damage to your opponent and just finishes them off, right? The gold cards, like red gold cards like Minskin Boo, Othari, which is that red-white Phoenix, 4th Aerolingus, absolutely busted. like you get to push red designs in Commander, which means that there is a space for red to get better in Cube. It just can't come from standard sets, right? And I know people love to like harp on Commander, made for Commander designs or whatever, but like that is actually a contributing factor to red getting better in Cube specifically, is that you can push what red does in these 40 life formats. You cannot do that in a 20 life format. So next set, Bloomburrow comes out or Duskmourn comes out. I wouldn't expect to get a pushed red card in a standard set, but I am expecting to get pushed red cards in Commander, which unfortunately doesn't affect our card pool very much because we don't get the Commander exclusive cards. But if you're building a paper cube or something, like you can port those Commander cards over to your cube, and they're often just the best cards red has, right? Fable the Mirror Breaker is a standard release card that I think nobody knew was going to be as powerful as it was. I don't think the developers even anticipated it being as powerful as it was, so that one's a little bit of an outlier. But name Red's best cards. They're coming from Modern Horizon sets, which cheat, or they're coming from Commander sets, which get to push the boundaries because of the way that, 40 life multiplayer formats kind of need red to do more.
Yeah, Fable was a very specific thing that we don't see very often, where it took something like a month for people to recognize that card was good. We remember it being the set, every deck in Standard is playing this card, but what people forget is that until the Pro Tour, it was like an Alchemy Pro Tour, people just weren't playing that card in Standard very much. And then like the pros showed up and showed that it was really, really powerful. But it is very, very rare these days that we have one of those cards just fly under the radar and then completely take over a form.
And I mean, the problem too is that when we do get these cards and we play them in our cube, like Lelia is a good example. We actually have Lelia, and I think Lelia is being printed in Modern Horizons 3, so we would have it now even if we didn't have it before. But the cards that are pushed for Commander end up oftentimes being too good in Cube. So it's like that delicate balance thing again, where like, Ragavan's too good, but then your next best red 1-drop's not good enough or something like that. It's like red must just be really hard to balance. And we're saying like, yeah, we want better red 1-drops, but we don't want them to be as good as Ragavan. And that's probably not as easy to do from the developer side of things, right? Mm. Because then if we got Goblin Bombardiers tomorrow on Arena, like there's no way we could put that in our cube. The card's insane. Like Gut, True Soul Zealot, no way we could put that in our cube. We're complaining a little bit. We're saying this is where red's at, but like, if we all put our design hat on, like what is the actual next step for them? Like, how do you push a red 1-drop to be a top tier red 1-drop without being another Ragavan? How do you push face damage without making it 2 mana deal 5 to your opponent? Like where are the edges there?
Well, like just give me Voldaren, whatever, the 1/1 that pings and makes a blood token, and just make it a 2/1 instead.
Make it a 2/1. Yeah, I don't think that would be too good, but maybe it would be. I don't know.
The thing is that the easiest way to fix card designs and make the especially the lower end of the curve more useful is to utility or like value creep things, so that you can get extra value as the game goes on, right? You can get extra benefit. Because if you push damage, it just makes these games feel wildly swingy on whether or not you open on cut down, right? And so I actually don't really expect us to get a huge amount of red 1-drops that push damage, and I suspect what we're going to have to settle for is we will see cards that are utility crept or they're value crept, and we'll just have to settle for that, much like we're doing in White, where like I think all of White's best 1-drops are value cards, and I think the ones in Modern Horizons 3 that they look really powerful, but they're kind of value long game oriented. They're not gate cards that are meant. I mean, they are good like on turn 1. They're not great top decks, but they're cards that aren't about pushing just all the damage on turn 1 or like snowballing the game like Ragavan. I think we're going to see more of these like 1-drops that scale into the mid and late game in some capacity.
He's dancing so hard around not saying the word Savannah Lion. You see it on his lips, yeah.
We don't have to have the Savannah Lions discussion, but I do agree with Teld that like Savannah Lion's stat line is really starting to show its age, especially since there are like so many 2-drops now that they can't attack into. It's like, cool, I played this on the play, and like I literally don't get to attack with it. If you're not going to pump the stats, which I agree with Teld that just like pumping the stats on 1-drops to compensate for the fact that, the stats are pumped on everything else is just going to lead to like even faster, less skill testing games. like in white we get Savannah Lions with upside. Like, give me Savannah Lions with like better upside than the upside that you're giving them.
With real
if that
upside,
makes any sense.
yeah.
With like really, because like people freaked out about Usher of the Fallen, and like let's be honest, like Usher of the Fallen is basically Savannah Lions unless you're playing into control.
Well, that was like before we actually started getting Savannah Lions in every set with upside. Like that was actually like the first Savannah Lions we'd gotten in a while. That was like, oh, this actually does something, you know. But, that was also 2021 or 2020 or something like that. So I did want to reiterate, red removal is getting better. And again, I think Shieldred the Apocalypse is like the card to like shake hands with and thank for the fact that like red damage is being pushed, or red removal is being pushed. But Teld mentioned Witch Stalker Frenzy, right? That's very often 1 mana to deal 5 damage to something at instant speed, and also works in a control deck well enough. Torch the Witness, like red removal with card advantage on it. Like slow card advantage, kind of an expensive spell, but like it clears a Titan of Industry out of the way if you need it to. Scorching Shot, the red sorcery, deal 5 damage to target creature, maybe creature or planeswalker, I don't know. You know, being able to clear off giant creatures for less mana is what red needs to do. And you can do that without pushing face burn.
I actually think, too, Scorching Shot, when we reviewed it, we talked about the red being a downside. But I had a conversation recently with one of our members talking about using pips as a way of, like, gating cards into decks that you want them to be played in. And I actually think that comes up with Scorching Shot as, like, a test for this, because I think Scorching Shot is very, very difficult to play in these, like, really multicolor heavy decks that we're seeing. And you kind of have to be, like, committed to red to get the effect. And it's worth... in a lot of facets, it's worth it to do, but you can't play that in like a 4-color mana base very easily.
Yeah, because in a 4-color mana base, like sometimes tapping like both of your red sources to cast it means it effectively costs more than 2 mana, if that makes any sense, because you don't have like another red to cast like a second red spell, and that might be like the only thing to do in your hand.
Yeah, you kind of have to be base red. Like these multicolored decks, even though they can support double pips, these were on like 5 and 6 drops, right? And it's a little different when you need to have 2 pips by turn 6 as opposed to turn like 2 or 3.
Honestly, pips, Magic needs to start using pips more. A couple other red cards worth noting here. I think Highway Robbery, the red card advantage tools, I think are okay. There aren't a ton of them, but red card advantage is fine. I did mention at the top of the episode that red is the only color that gets temporary card draw, whereas every single other color has permanent card draw, and that is a inherent weakness when, you know, every other color can just draw cards and you have to, like, run out your Ren's Resolve and hope it hits like the right combination of cards, which oftentimes you can like strategically position yourself that Ren's Resolve is a draw too, but sometimes it's not and it feels terrible. But Highway Robbery is a nice one. Inti is a fantastic hand smoothing card, just a good aggressive creature. Like I wouldn't mind so much if more cards were pushed at Inti's power level, because I don't think Inti is an insurmountable card. It's just a merely very strong red 2-drop. Maybe in certain environments it's really busted, but we give it a pass here because red needs the help.
Definite signs of hope. Like Breaches isn't like busted, but it's quite good. Inti is arguably our most powerful red 2-drop, and then we discussed Slickshot at the top of the podcast as just being like a great way for red to do what red does. So, yeah, we're not getting better 1-drops, but it looks like they're maybe we're entering an era of them pushing like red creatures a little harder, which it needs.
Yeah, and more of that would be nice. We've trickled this in a little bit, but, you know, where would we like to see red go? We talked about this in blue. We talked about how in blue we wanted cancel variants that affect the board, or we wanted cheaper counter magic, or we wanted card draw that could affect the board, and ended up blue got those things, and ended up blue is quite good at this point. And that was all within a year's time. You know, we didn't have to wait 5 years for blue to get good again. Blue just naturally kind of progressed. What do you want to see from red? Obviously, you want to see good 1-drops. You want to see, like, Savannah Lions with real upside as opposed to Savannah Lions with Embereth Veteran basically doesn't have upside, you know. But what else would you guys like to see? I think the combat tricks have gotten really good, but, you know, how much room is there for combat tricks in Cube? Like, usually 1 per section, 2 per section?
I think we're coming up on needing to do an episode about that, but I'm actually of the opinion these days that the way they're pushing combat tricks is a great thing for Magic, and they are really, really fun these days and like really powerful. I think we've reached a point where they've recognized that the combat tricks need to offer blowout potential. Like, instead of just being functionally like a removal spell that your opponent can blow out, what we're seeing now are combat tricks that are like pushing huge amounts of damage, generating 2-for-1s, generating 3-for-1s in the case of like Trash the Town. And I think that's like what combat tricks need to look like in order for you to play more than, like you said, like one per section. I think they're still a little restrictive because you gotta have to be creature based and be attacking with them very frequently, but I think we're entering a new era, like an era of combat tricks where they're like competitive with real cube equity slots. So I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing some more of that, though. It's like kind of hard to imagine something better than Monstrous Rage, and like where would we fit it in, you know, is always the question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if we got another combat trick of the power level of like Monstrous Rage, we'd probably just cut like our shittiest burn spell for it, right?
Probably, yeah.
Because the other nice thing about like really pushed combat tricks for Red is, combat tricks are just fun because they add a dynamic to combat that is largely absent from higher power cubes because of the blow up potential. You know, the combat tricks in Red costing 1 mana, I think, is really important. But they also, if they're going to continue to kind of make most of the best Red creatures like prowess dudes, like they also trigger all your prowess shit, so they're probably even better in a lot of Red sections than they would be elsewhere. Yeah, so push combat tricks would be cool. I personally think that what Red like needs more than anything else is more evasion. I want to see more first strike. I want to see more menace. I want more ways for Red creatures to continue to be able to push damage into the later game, because like as we've discussed earlier, like the later game is happening a lot sooner now than it used to. So if you're not going to create a bunch of red flyers because that just doesn't feel on theme or whatever, like give me some creatures with like haste and menace. Like they don't have to be huge, but like haste and menace is just a fabulous combination.
Yeah, I think there's a certain issue of like too where the more expensive cards, especially like 3+, they run the risk if they're not really aggressively slanted of just being poached by your mid-range decks and used as value cards. So like sometimes we see this with Breaches, we see it occasionally with like Posse Boss for Kindling Phoenix, almost always with like Inferno Titan Glorybringer going into like these bigger mid-range decks. And like these are all really powerful red cards, but they're cards that aren't doing what our base red decks are wanting to do. And so yeah, it would be nice to see more, you know, like you said, more combat keywords, more ways of like enabling attacks and stuff like that. We're seeing some, like the Coyote's been really cool. Like I don't know how powerful it is like long term, but you know, it does set up some really explosive turns, and like there's some other cards that do similar things we're seeing a little bit of. So those are the kind of things that we're looking for our base red decks, I think, are just more cards that don't just go into mid-range decks. Like I know Flame Tongue Kavu was on here as like a card we'd like see on the client potentially, but like that's just a mid-range card, right? Like that's not, I mean, you might play it in your aggro deck, you probably would, but like that's a mid-range card. You're just playing it, and you're 2-for-1ing your opponent. I think what they're going to have to do, if they want 1-drops to be like attacking creatures, I think they're just going to have to bite the bullet and print a 3/1 at some point for 1 mana, because like the 2/3s just trade so efficiently with the current crop of red, of not just red, but like 1-drops in general, and that's like not even.
I don't think an Isamaru style red 3/1 would be a broken card, especially if you want to tack legendary onto it so that you can't like run out a bunch of them in constructed or whatever, which is, you know, the design impetus behind Isamaru in the first place. But red 3/1 with no extra text, I'm not even convinced that would be a good card, let alone a broken card or anything like that.
I think it would be a good way to ensure that it can still attack into stuff like later into the game, but I think it's gated by the fact that it still trades with like literally any cheap thing.
Yeah, your opponent's random like mercenary token or whatever just trades it off. Yeah.
There's a lot they could do, I think, to bolster red, and it's really easy from the perspective of podcasters to be like, this is what we want to see, as opposed to, you know, like, here's how you actually design the cards, and they got a balance for constructed and all that good stuff. If anybody at Wizards even cares about constructed anymore, I don't know.
Hey, we're a cube podcast, so they can burn down every single constructed format as long as we get good cards.
I don't care what happens to Modern with Modern Horizons 3. I don't have to play the broken cards, but yeah. Let's wrap up with things that you guys would like to see on the client. I made a little bit of a list here. The majority of it, honestly, is just the good face burn, like the traditional face burn cards like Burst Lightning, Chain Lightning, Firebolt. I personally, if I had to pick, I would say Lava Dart is the one I would like the most, because I think it's just an incredibly fun card to play with, and it works in those prowessy decks really nice. It's just double spell for 1 mana.
Yeah, Lava Dart's really cool.
Yeah. Flame Slash is another one I think would actually be a huge boon to our card pool. Just 1 mana, deal 4 at sorcery speed. No other upside, but being able to clear off one of those X4s for a single mana. Chris, yeah, you've every time we've mentioned red cards we want, you've mentioned Fire Blast. Is that still something that you think would be a good addition to the card pool?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. I have said that I'm not interested in free spells for our cube in particular, but this skirts that, because like what I really have against free spells is free instants. Like I want you tapping out to give your opponent an actual window. Like that's an important decision point for me when you're playing like this is the reason that we would like never play like Solitude, right? It's just like, I was tapped out, but like look at this fucking crazy thing that I did mid combat. But Fire Blast is just such an efficient way at the end of the game for you to just be like, okay, I am not drawing cards. I have what I have on board. I'm running out of gas. I don't need these mountains. Here's a shitload of damage to your face to close out the game. Like, I think red just needs more ways to go like, boom, here's a haste creature, and oh, by the way, you burn.
So, to those of you listening at home, Fire Blast is the entry point to Chris's villainous free spell arc. It's a pathway to power some would deem unnatural.
I love playing free spells. Yeah. Those who don't know, Fire Blast is a 4 red instant, deal 4 damage to any target, but you can sacrifice 2 mountains to not pay its mana cost. So it's like a traditional red finisher in every sense. Like if you have to use this to kill your opponent's bloated contaminator, you're not winning the game. You mentioned Flame Tongue Kavu. That's the 4 mana 4/2, enters battlefield, deals 4 damage to target creature. I don't think that would be too good. I think it would be instantly one of red's best cards, but I think that's the type of
I think
you don't think it would be a good card?
I think it would be okay. I mean, when you stack it up next to like Rekindling Phoenix and Popsy Boss and Hazaret, I think it's way weaker than those.
Well, I think it's also much better when you cast it, you kill something, and then you're going to use it to like force your opponent into a bad trade, as opposed again to like attacking with it and letting your opponent trade off their like bear for it.
I mean, honestly, like if we put Flame Tongue Kavu in, we're just going to see Doug put it in Bant Blink, and
that's what I'm saying. Like this is not an aggro card. This is just like a good mid range card.
It is not a aggro focused card. A card you can put in aggro, but it is like a good mid range card. I think Ravenous Chupacabra as a 4/2 is pretty strong.
I'd rather see Flame Tongue Yearling simply for the mana discussion that we've had, because that card is a little more constrained on how you can cast it.
Yeah, I could see that. Although, like, the mana discussion, I'm sure we'll have it, like, a future date. But, like, you can gate it by playing more pips, or you can gate it by, like, recognizing that maybe your fixing's a little too good and doing something about that. But, yeah, I think Flame Tongue Kavu, now that I think about it, like, a long time ago, I heard some folks on the 540 podcast just be like, yeah, this card's completely aged out. But, like, I'm not really sure that I think that that's true.
I mean, some percentage of the time it's just going to be, like, better than Chandra 4, right? Like, if you're going to downtick your Chandra, a lot of times, like, Chandra immediately dies, whereas the Kavu forces a trade. I'm not saying, like, that is not me saying that it is better than Chandra Torch of Defiance. That is me saying that some percentage of the time it is just going to play to the board better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it would become one of Red's best cards in our card pool personally, but it's hard to parse out where it would stand just theoretically. The last card I wanted to mention was Goblin Guide too, which we said is Goblin Guide is not the card it used to be, but I think it is better than those Phoenix Chick Reckless Lackey type cards, while still being worse than the Spell Slingery, maybe better, worse than Lavamancer type cards. But I think Goblin Guide would fit the context of our cube without being like the one drop that would suddenly bolster red aggro. I think it would be fine.
I think it would be bad, but maybe I'm
yeah, a lot of people seem to agree with that, and that's fair. Like we have seen like a lot of these like modern 2015 all-star cards kind of fit the context of our cube well enough, because it feels like that's kind of the power level that we ended up at. We're slightly higher than that at this point, but yeah, that's all I'll say is I think Goblin Guide would be a step up above the one drops that we're currently getting, but would not be a revolutionary card for our cube. But yeah, any other red cards come to mind that you guys would love to see?
Well, there's a card. Actually, it's already on the client. It's not like a red card I'd like to see, but I wonder if like electrostatic infantry would actually be like a pretty solid red 2-drop for us. Like
you had to cut it from the peasant cube.
Yeah, like if you trigger it one time, it's a 2/3 trample for 2, which isn't like a terrible rate, and if you trigger it again, it's just awesome.
Another is it gold card?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I think that depends entirely on how Bernie your red section is.
Sure. Also, when I say is it gold card, like, I just mean that the only 2-color combination, like, if you're playing, like, a very, very, very heavy red deck, sure, whatever, like, the other 5 cards splash maybe don't matter. But, you know, but if, like, if you're really trying to get there on density and, like, red is not so open that you can just draft basically mono red, assuming you want to, you're going to want to be in blue as your secondary color with these kind of decks.
Yeah, hard agree. That's one of the issues, and one of the reasons that I actually like Inti so much is traditionally a lot of the pushed red 2-drops have cared about instants and sorceries, which makes them not cross over into other colors particularly well. You already brought up Rabble Master, I'm assuming.
I didn't mention Rabble Master, but that's a good shout.
Yeah, Rabble Master would be a good get.
That card kills people dead. That card would still be nice.
A card that I do not want to see on the client, and I would not advocate for playing it if we got it, is Sulfuric Vortex. Like, I just think that card's really annoying.
We have it. It's just called Clothis, and it costs green mana.
Yeah, it costs green mana, and it's like way better. We do have Eidolon, I guess. That's maybe something we could bring back, but people don't like that card. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of funny. Like you mentioned, like a lot of the red cards that we don't have that we would want are basically just like back when they printed better burn spells.
Well, I used the Vintage Cube as a reference. I was like, I just out of curiosity, what red cards from Vintage Cube would I like to see on the client? And it was like a handful of burn spells, Flame Tongue Kavu, and then cards that are like way too powerful, like Goblin Bombardiers and Fury and stuff like that.
Angie's Ravager is a pretty good card.
That's the like madness creature that draws a new hand when it attacks or something like that.
Yeah, discard your hand, draw 3 cards whenever it attacks. That's not bad.
When you say Goblin Bombardier, are you talking about Broadside Bombardier?
Yeah, I probably said Goblin Bombardier like every time, but Broadside Bombardier, which if you haven't played against that card, it's it's better than Fable the Mirror Breaker. That's all I'm going to say. The whole point here being that there's a really fine line with design in red cards, and I'm not sure where they land, but it's very clear from our experiences over the last couple months that red needs a little bit of a push. And when we say it's the worst color, we don't mean like it can't win. We just mean that it has glaring weaknesses that the other colors don't have, and it has more weaknesses, I think. And we're still at a point, especially with our 1-drops, where we're playing filler cards, and I don't want to play filler cards at this point. I don't want to play filler cards in 2024. So
yeah, it's been a long time since it was a color that they were like obviously pushing. It's probably time to push it again, especially since control is apparently like top dog in standard right now. The way that you control for that is you make the red deck better.
Mm-hmm. That feels like a good point to stop here. I will say thanks as always to everyone listening. Remember, best way to support Jank Diver Gaming and the Jank Dank podcast is to join the Discord server. Come draft with us, give us your feedback. Great place to hang out with like-minded individuals and talk about Cube, Retail Limited, all things Magic. You can find links to the Discord wherever you're listening to this podcast. I think I said that twice, but you get it twice. We have tons of scheduled drafts throughout the week, including the mainline Jank Diver Cube, formerly the Unrestricted Cube. We have the Jank Diver Peasant Cube. We have various grab bag cubes throughout the week. And we have a scheduled F&M event where players vote on a cube to play, as well as weekend chaos drafts. So there's plenty to do. Again, Brawlbarian shout out. Teld just snuck that one in there at the end. If you want to come participate in some stipulation-based deck building and just hang out with some fun people and brew some decks for Brawl, and you don't want to play on the ladder, you don't want to play against those filthy Malcolm decks and those filthy Prosper decks that people are bringing to the Brawl. No shade to anyone in particular. Like, that was just the first 2 legends that came to mind. Chris, what do you play in Brawl? What commanders do you play in Brawl? Just curious.
Radagast.
Is that so?
Yeah. Come join us in the Brawlbarians League. We're getting ready to start up another one. Check out our socials: Twitter at JankDiverGaming, YouTube.com/JankDiverGaming, and Twitch.tv/Teld Talks, where you can listen to Teld talk about some Magic as well. I believe we will have the entire Modern Horizons spoiler in time for our next episode. There's plenty of leaks out there. I've been like dodging them left and right, but reading about half of them, ignoring about half of them. But I think our next episode is going to be a Modern Horizons 3 review, and I think everyone's anticipating that it's going to be like a big step up for cube design. We do get it on Arena as well, so we'll see how much that changes things. I don't know.
We'll see like how many cards.
For.
Yeah, we'll just have to see how many cards we just have to like dismiss out of hand and never put in here because they're just too much.
I mean, the Evoke Elementals right off the bat is a handful of like 5 cards that'll probably never see the light of day.
Teld mentioned that he thinks the 2-mana Planeswalker Ajani card is probably just too insane on rate too.
Probably. I mean, there's also the new Blood Artist that's just like pushed on rate as the Lazatep Reaver with like Blood Artist text.
I like that card. Like, we're gonna play
that.
Yeah,
we're absolutely they've already spoiled like multiple commons that are just like breaking formats.
At this point, like, I know it's Modern Horizons 3. I know it's not indicative of Magic design as a whole, but it's like, are we just going to get sets where we play 0 cards because they're all too good? Maybe Modern Horizons 3 is the one. Maybe it's the one.
Yeah, then we just hang it up. We're just like, we're done designing. Our work is complete, like God on the 7th day.
I'm actually mostly looking forward to the new to modern reprints that they bring in. I'm curious what reprints they bring in. We'll talk about that next week. I'm sure it'll be a fairly long set review. I have to imagine there's tons to talk about, but that's the plan for our next episode. Thanks for taking this deep dive into Red with us, and Wizards, do something about that. Bolster Red a little bit, just a little bit. Like, don't push it, don't break standard, but just make Red a little bit better for us, and we appreciate that.
Tim foreshadowing a little bit here. You know, he's we've confirmed he works at WotC, so he's letting us know there are good red cards on the way.
Mm-hmm. All right, take it easy, everybody. Okay, I asked you guys a question yesterday for a sign-off. I have to get my picture out real quick. You guys might remember that I had you all compete for the title of Nomenclature Norman, which I think Chris currently holds that title. We had a competition that people seem to think like there was coercion
totally fair.
there.
Totally fair competition.
I don't know where that accusation came from, but I promise this one's completely fair. In fact, you guys are on a completely even playing field. But I asked Chris and Teld yesterday what their favorite limited sets were. And I'm going to borrow a sign-off from the tried and true limited resources, their Let's Stump Vargas sign-off. And I am going to give you a pack of your supposed favorite limited set. And all I'm going to do is give you card names, and I want you to tell me what the card is.
Oh, Teld's going to win, like, hands down.
I'm going to read you a card name. You're going to tell me what the card does. I don't need it to be like 100% accurate, but I do need the correct mana cost. I need the correct power toughness, and I need the abilities. Like, if you don't get the exact ability, I'll probably give it to you. But I do need keywords. So I will say these packs are pretty even in terms of like cards you guys probably know off the top of your head versus cards you don't. But I'm going to let you guys pick who goes first, though.
Teld goes first.
Okay.
All right. You've got half easy ones and half cards that I don't think I would get, but all right,
let's go for it.
All right, so first card up, Fang of Shigeki.
So that is a singular green mana for a 1/1 enchantment. It's either a snake or a lizard creature.
Yeah, I don't need creature types.
It has the keyword Death Touch.
Yep, correct on that one. Second card up, Master's Rebuke.
So that is 1 and a green for an instant, and target creature you control deals damage to target creature you don't control. It's a bite at instant speed.
There is one tiny extra thing in there.
Oh, can it hit your creatures too?
No.
I'm
going to give it to you. It can hit planeswalkers, but you know it's the fight spell. The fight spell. Moonfolk Puzzlemaker.
So that is a 2 and a blue for a 1/4 artifact creature, and when it becomes tapped, you scry 1.
That's correct. A Moonfolk Wizard. Fourth card, Golden Tail Disciple.
That is 2 and a white for a 2/3 enchantment creature, Fox Monk, I think, and it has lifelink.
All right, you're flexing with the creature types. It is, in fact, a Fox Monk. Okay, this one has some numbers on it that you might get wrong, but I do need the correct numbers. Iron Hoof Boar.
Okay, so that is 5 and a red for a 5/4 artifact creature. It has haste, trample, and you can channel it for 1 and a red to give target creature you control. It might have to be attacking +3/+1 and trample until end of turn.
That's correct. Yeah, it doesn't have to be an attacking creature, but +3/+1 and trample. Got all the numbers right. I think this one's pretty easy. Twisted Embrace.
Twisted Embrace. Is that the 2 and black for the enchantment aura that gives +1/+1, and when it ETBs, you get to destroy target creature you don't control, or a target creature you destroy?
That is correct. I'll give it to you, but what can it enchant?
It's creature, and it might be, is it creature or like vehicle or creature artifact?
It's creature or artifact. All right, you've gotten them all so far. I think you got this one. See, you guys are cheating because you guys have a Neo Cube, but whatever. Shrine Steward.
So Shrine Steward is a 5 colorless mana for a 3/2, and when it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for an aura or shrine creature and put it into your hand.
Correct. Here's one I know Chris would absolutely get. Tawashi Song Shaper.
Yeah, so that is 1 in a red for a 2/2 artifact creature. I want to say it has like some sort of weird creature type like DJ or something, but maybe I'm misremembering that. And when a artifact...
Human Artificer.
Yeah, when an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Tawashi Song Shaper gets +1/+0 until end of turn.
Yep. Repel the Vial.
That is 3 and a white for a white instant. It is a modal, and it exiles an enchantment or a creature with power 4 or greater.
That's correct. I didn't think you would get that one, honestly. Prodigy's Prototype.
Oh God. Okay. Is that the white, blue, gold vehicle card that's like I think it's a...
I don't know.
Hold on. I think it's that. It's like a 5 mana 3/4 with like crew 2, and when it attacks, you make a 1/1 or something.
You got all the text right, but it's 3 mana. It's 1 white blue.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, okay.
So first miss, Patchwork Automaton.
Okay,
easy one.
Yeah. So that is 2 colorless for a 1/1 with Ward 2, and when you cast an artifact, it gets a +1/+1 counter.
Yep, Nezumi Prowler.
Yeah, so Nezumi Prowler, I believe, is the 1 in a black for a 3/1 artifact creature rat ninja, and it has ninjutsu for 1 in a black, and when it also has lifelink, I think, and when it when it ETBs, target creature you control gets lifelink until end of turn.
Anything else you want to add to that?
Does it also get Death Touch?
Okay, 2 more. Befriending the Moths, which I have to actually look
so that is 3
for this card.
That is 3 and a white for a enchantment saga. The first 2 chapters gives a creature you control +1/+1 and flying until end of turn, and then it flips into a 2/4 flying moth creature.
It is indeed. And then you've got a janky ass rare here. Risona Asari Commander.
Okay. I think that is the... Oh god. Okay, it's a samurai. It's like red. Okay, is this a 3-drop or the 5-drop? I think there's 2 of them. So this is it's a red-white samurai, and when a samurai you control attacks alone, you get an extra combat step, I think, and it's like a 3 mana 3/3. So I think it's 1 red-white 3/3. When a samurai you control attacks alone, you get an additional combat step at the end of your combat step.
Okay, I'm not going to give that one to you. You're actually mixing up the 2 red-white rares in the set. This is the one that gets the indestructible counter when it attacks.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
Removes the... You're thinking of, I think it's Ryu or something like that. It's
I knew there was 2 of them, and I knew I was going to get them mixed up.
You made an amalgamation of them. Okay, so Chris,
watch my rare be like Fable of the Mirror Breaker.
No, your rare is pretty janky too. I'm not going to lie, but Chris, he missed 2. Okay, so you got, as soon as you miss the 3rd one, you lose the title of Neo Nathan here.
All right, let's get it over with.
All right, so you got I don't know about some of these. Your pack, I think, is like marginally harder. Starting with You Are Already Dead.
You Are Already Dead is 1 black mana for an instant, and I believe it says destroy target creature that was dealt damage this turn.
Does it do anything else?
Probably.
Am I allowed to rebuttal?
Would you play that card on its own if that's all it did?
No, that would suck. Does it return the creature? No, it doesn't do that. I don't know. I'm stumped.
It draws a card.
It cantrips. It draws a card.
It draws a card.
All right.
Okay.
All right, so we're down one. Commune with Spirits.
Commune with Spirits is 1 green mana to impulse the top of your deck for a creature or enchantment.
It's an enchantment or land.
I'm going to give it to him because you just said it out loud.
That's fair. I deserve that.
It's enchantment or land. Okay. I don't know if I even remember this card. Lethal Exploit.
Lethal Exploit is 1 and a black for a sorcery, and it gives target creature -2/-2 until end of turn. Does it have more text?
It does. It's also an instant, so we're gonna call that one a flop there. You got the next one though. Experimental Synthesizer.
1 red for an artifact. When it ETBs, you exile the top card of your library. You may play it until end of turn, and you can sacrifice it for 2 and a red to impulse the top of your deck again.
What else does that do if you sacrifice it?
I don't know.
Okay, it makes a 2/2 samurai.
That's right.
Yep. Okay, well that's three L's there. So yeah, you were right.
I knew I was gonna go down. Like Teld will be like, oh yeah, this card's kind of like this card, and I'm like, what card is that? And he's like, oh, it's the common from this set that came out 3 years ago that does exactly this. And
I don't know how many of these I would have like. Your rare is Mirror Box, which I don't know if I would have gotten all the text on Mirror Box, and also
not even going to attempt that one.
The double face card is Tales of Master Sashiro, which is one of the ones I know the least. Like I could not tell you what the back of that card does. It's like
it's a 5/5 vigilance haste creature.
You already won, Teld. You already won. You don't have to show off, man. Yeah, but what creature type is it?
I actually don't know that one.
I don't either, and I was going to look it up, but I actually don't care enough. It's probably a snake. I think it's a snake warrior.
I think it's a snake warrior. Yeah.
Now I have to look it up real quick before we sign off. It is nope, didn't come up. Anyway, so yeah, Teld, you have officially been declared Neo Nathan, which I don't know. That doesn't really roll off the tongue. Maybe we should go with we're going to go with
Nathan now. That's not a prize.
I'm committing crimes. Is that what we're saying?
We're going to go Retail Randy instead. How about that? So just for everybody at home, dear listeners who are keeping track, Chris is currently holding the Nomenclature Norman title, and Teld has officially won the Retail Randy title.
I would just like to point out that the Jank Diver law firm is actually looking into this. There is some contestation of the Nomenclature Norman title. They believe there might have been some sort of performance enhancing substances used.
It definitely wasn't. It wasn't fixed by the Mafia. It definitely was not fixed by the mob.
As the host of that particular challenge, I take offense to what you're implying, but this seems like a good point to cut it. Let's go ahead and wrap it up there.
Give it to me, baby. Yeah. Give it to me, baby. Yeah.